We think women need to talk more openly about money because money really matters. It shouldn't be embarrassing or confusing. Join the conversation. We'll be discussing a whole range of topics which will help you get comfortable with your finances. Money Matters. Brought to you by AJ Bell. Hello and welcome to another episode of the AJ Bell Money Matters podcast, where we dig into the really big finance stories impacting women. I'm Danni, and normally I'd be joined by Laura, but she's taken a few days off to settle her daughter into primary school. Gosh, that is a big moment for all us mums, something that I vaguely remember. It feels like an awfully long time ago, like back now. But it is something that can have a huge impact on every family finances, especially if you have been dealing with big nursery fees, which is why the fact that you can now get 30 hours free childcare for children aged 9 months old is a huge deal. But remember, if you haven't already applied, you'll have to wait until next term, which starts in January next year. Anyway, that's not our one big thing. And I'm not alone. So let's get into it because Charlene Young is back. Hi, Charlene.
Hi, Danni. Hi, everyone. It's really good to be back. I think I am very relieved that back to school is in full swing. I mean, we've had a lovely summer and the weather's been pretty good on the whole. Pleased to report, even up here in the Northwest. But definitely good for me because I've got two boys who need lots of exercise and they need to get outdoors a lot. Fed, watered, and exercise. They sound a bit like dogs, I think. But yeah, absolutely craving a bit of routine back. And my snack cupboard and my phone battery are both very empty.
Yes, I've had to pay for a lot of, Mum, I'm just going out with my mates. We've had driving tests which have been paid for and passed. One
Oh,
of them's
wow.
passed, yeah, and the other one has passed her theory. So it's been a very expensive but productive summer for us.
Just think of all those taxi rides you can cash back in, Danni. That's what's on my mind. I've got a while to go, but
Well, the youngest is actually back at college today. Hurrah! I've actually barely seen her. She's been locked in a room, which meant that when I opened the door to her room this morning, it really did require some variety of hazmat suit or at least a pair of rubber gloves. And I sort of waded through and found, crockery that I've not seen for at least 6 weeks. But
oh my God.
But it's a huge year for her because she's taking her A-levels in the summer, which means that at the moment she's got lots of decisions to make about her future, lots of events about career choices.
Yeah, and pushing on, getting on, and whatever career you are in or you're hoping to get into is something our guest this week has some brilliant insight into. We've got Pavita Cooper, who is chair of the 30% Club in the UK. This was set up to help get more female representation on boards and more women into leadership roles. It's had what you would say is incredible success, but Pavita knows there's still more to be done. And really, it starts with us. It starts with you, all of us, pushing for promotion, knowing your value, and making those decisions that are right for you. I've been there myself. It takes a lot of courage to kind of get over the line, kind of going from thinking to actually doing and putting stuff in practice, I think. But Pavita's got some brilliant tips on how to push yourself, how to get out there, get a mentor. And something that's really important, I think, we've talked about your daughter being this age, going into the workplace, university, how to manage office life in the age of social media.
Yeah, what Pavita had to say about the pressures that many younger workers face, not only to do well in the office, but also to be seen to be living their best lives online all the time. I mean, that really struck home with me because my teenage girls do spend a huge amount of time on social media. In fact, for my eldest going off to university, her TikTok and Instagram accounts are the first places that she's actually meeting already a lot of the students that she's going to be spending the next 4 years. I mean, it's crazy. You must remember going to university. You literally shipped up. Your parents dropped you off, and that was the first time that you met people. But
Yeah.
no, already they've got these groups formed on WhatsApp. People are taking a look at other people's Instagram so that they're making snap judgments based on people's social media profiles.
Oh my gosh, yeah. No, what was it? 20 years ago, I think. I can't remember now you mention it. But yeah, I'm quite glad I didn't have all that social media back then.
Yeah, hard work. It's a lot. I'm very
Oh,
glad. And I just think of some of the photographs from my time at university that are tucked away in an album somewhere. I would not want those out on social media.
there's a brilliant meme actually that was going around on Instagram over the summer, which was such a Britney Spears song, and it was all about being lucky that when we were growing up, some of our questionable choices, whether that's outfits, music taste, whatever, aren't documented online. Yes, there might be hard copies somewhere, but yeah, you just reminded me of all of that now. But we grow up. Speaking of growing up, it does come to us all. Our one big thing this week is some new data on the gender pension gap. In fact, there's kind of two gaps here. So, depending on whether you're talking about just the state pension or your own pension pots, too.
Yes, and I'm going to start with the good news. I like good news. I don't get to share it very often, so this is quite nice. The state pensions gender gap has narrowed to just £1.80 a week. Now, that means that on average, women are now receiving 99.1% of the amount of state pension received by men. Now, that data came from the Department of Work and Pensions, was obtained by former Pensions Minister Sir Steve Webb through a Freedom of Information request. And it covers the period December 1st, 2023 and November 30th, 2024. And I think when I saw how narrow that gap had become, considering there are women still in their 80s, that gap is much, much bigger. I think that just demonstrates how the simplification from the introduction of the new state pension, which was introduced in 2016, has really had a good, positive impact on simplifying the system. With the old system, lots of women ended up losing some of their entitlement because of career gaps due to caring responsibilities. So before 2016, women were receiving on average 86% of what men received. So it feels like that particular gender pension battle has been fought, and it's not quite there, but it's not far off. And that's fantastic news. But I'm afraid, Charlene, that is where the good news stops.
Yeah. Yes, it does. I mean, that's an amazing stat, 99% coming from where we were kind of in those like higher 80s, as you mentioned. And there's still a few issues with that new state pension and some transitional issues, making sure that women have claimed everything they're entitled to, particularly in terms of credits, as you mentioned, when caring for children. And yeah, I get to be the bearer of bad news. I guess, that's the guest presenter's prerogative. Because it is still really bad news, sadly, when it comes to the gender pensions gap more generally, more broadly. So there's been lots and lots of data looking at this that's been released over the summer. If you want to find out more on the data itself, do take a look at our website, ajbellmoneymatters.co.uk. Our wonderful colleague Rachel Vay, has an article explaining all of the data, but kind of to put it in a nutshell, the new government figures put that gap between the amount of money built up by men and women coming up to retirement at 48%, which is just terrible, really. So if you're looking at this 2-year period that they analysed between 2020 and 2022, women aged 55 to 59 on average had built up a private pension pot of £81,000. But compare that to men, where the average pension pot was £156,000. I think, you can talk about the percentage gap, but when you look at how that might stretch if you are looking to get yourself an income in retirement to support yourself through retirement, if you use that pot to provide you with an income at age 60, it would give men around £11,000 a year from that private pension pot, but women just £6,000 a year. That's £5,000 a year less for every year of the rest of their life.
That really put it into perspective for me when I saw those figures. And another thing that really summed it up was a report that the TUC, the trade union, does every year, and it takes in both the private pension and state pension. And it highlighted that the gender gap effectively meant that women go 4 months of every year without getting a pension when you compare their income to that of men. So that's the rest of the year because we're in September now. I mean, that's absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah, I think like you say, when you put it into that perspective, that's just, you're not getting paid for 4 months of the year. So like it's just crazy. So yes, good news on the state pension, as you say, and a good lot of work done to simplify that. But yeah, more to be done on the private pension side. But it's not all bad news. You did say you like good news.
I do like good news, and I thought it was only fair that I share the wealth.
Thank you. Yes, I do really like good news, and we like to give a positive, obviously, uplift in our podcast when we're talking about female finances. And there's some really good news coming from workplace pensions, thanks to something called auto enrollment. So, if you're not aware, that's where if you join a new job and you earn over a certain amount each year, you're automatically put into a pension scheme. You don't have to do anything, it automatically happens for you. And that's made a huge difference. And the good news here is almost as many women as men are now saving for their retirement. So 78% of women compared to 82% of men. And in the private sector, women are putting in roughly the same contribution rate at about 8%. So really, really good news.
It is good news. But the discrepancy happens, of course, that women on average still earn less than men. So even with the same percentage going in, it's actually a low amount going into the pot. And we've spoken about this at length. And I know that you've read our Financial Wobbly Bits report as well, because we did some great research. If you haven't seen it, do take a look at it on the website, because it just looks at the reasons that women's financial life, their path, is different to that compared to men. And the notable bit is that the gap is much smaller at younger ages before those life paths start to diverge. And we've spoken about it before. I mean, we started talking about our kids, about them going back to school. And I kept working, but I did go part time when I first had my children. And I know lots of women take time out of the workplace. Maybe they go back to work part time, or that they take a couple of years out of the workplace, and that then impacts how much they have in their pot. And of course, if you miss out on contributions, you're also then missing out on that lovely compound interest, which, at that point in your life, you've got a lot of time before you retire. And at that point, it's really important.
Yeah, time's really on your side. And actually, one thing to pick out while I'm on my kind of good news path, if you like, is we've talked about the money that's paid into pensions. But one thing I always really quite like to highlight to people, especially with auto enrollment, is it means that millions of women are also investing. So you've talked about compound interest, compound returns. And, sometimes with auto enrollment, that automatic pension scheme, that might happen automatically. It will go into what is called a default fund without you realizing it. But the important thing there is that we are investing. And lots of people might not realize that. They might realize that they haven't invested yet. But you actually probably have during your pension scheme. And why is that important? As you've mentioned, kind of over the long term, being invested gives you the best chance of growing your savings faster than cash and pesky inflation. But absolutely, as you say, if we're talking about percentages going in, if as those life events, those twists and turns come along, that means that you are earning less for whatever reason, that percentage of a lower amount is going to mean less money in your pension scheme. But there are things you can do. One thing we talk about a lot at AJ Bell, both on Money Matters and our other podcasts, is mopping up your pensions, rounding them up, combining them, especially if you had lots of different jobs over our lifetime, which is kind of the norm now. Let's be honest, even I love pensions, but even I can lose track of where things are in my finances. I'm very much like I should practice what I preach, really. So track down where your pensions are, have a look at them, engage with them, try and be a little bit more proactive. And that's how we can kind of eke out the benefits of those extra bits of admin. I think, as you mentioned, our financial lives, how they pan out. It's a nice little segue into some brilliant articles you've written, Danny, that I absolutely love. Financial Life series that are on the AJ Bell Money Matters website, going through those different stages, what we need to think about, and in particular with pensions as well. I think, hopefully you'll agree with this, but the overall message is whatever stage you're at, it's not too late, is it?
No, absolutely. I think that's really important. I went to a vow renewal at the weekend of a friend of mine. So it was a lot of women in their 50s, and we were all standing around having a drink. And someone asked me about pensions. And I absolutely I know, I'm
That's
now
good.
popular among my friends when I'm talking about this stuff because they were sort of saying, well, I've started to engage now with the pension that I have. I've started to bring my pots of cash together so I can sort of see. And they were saying, well, I'm a bit worried that I don't have enough. And you're absolutely right. It's not too late. If you think they're 51, which means 15 years, 16 years before they retire, particularly if they wait until state pension age, which will be 67 by the time I retire. That's a lot of time to be able to put in as much as you can. And I think that's the key. Put in as much as you can. And one of the women there had her daughter there, and I bored this poor girl to tears because she's just starting her first job. And I just said, find out what the maximum contribution is that your employer is going to make. Don't just settle, because so many people just go for the default. You're signed up. It's like, we're going to put this amount in. Fine, absolutely. Can you get more free money? Because it's
Yeah,
yours.
absolutely. And, if you wanted to speak to your employer, you would ask them about what's called matched contributions. So, like you say, Danny, there is a minimum that they need to put in, and you need to also put in under that kind of auto enrollment piece. But lots of employers, including our own, will match what you put in up to a certain level. So, for example, if you put in 6, 7, 8%, they will sometimes also match that up to 6, 7, and 8%. Like you say, the potential for free money and the benefits of putting money into a pension is that you get tax relief. So just think of that. It is a bit of a pensions jargon term. I'd love another way to kind of describe it. I guess it's a bit of a bonus, if you like. The government will top up your pension every time you pay into it. And depending on what rate of tax you pay, that could be worth up to 40 and even 45% in tax relief. So like you say, it's not too late. Time is on most people's sides. And especially if you can up those contributions, get the benefit of those compound returns, you can bridge that gap and build your own pension pots.
See, I'm probably not going to get invited to many more parties, but hopefully it was very useful. I think people just
I'm sure it was.
want to have a good life. They want to think that they're going to be sorted when they retire, and particularly for women, of course, because we tend to live that bit longer.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I feel like pensions are becoming less scary. I really hope that is the case. And, bring on the dinner parties where I don't hide behind what I do. Right. Enough of me chatting away. It is time for our special guest this week. I don't know about you. I'm starting to feel a little bit more upbeat. So my snack battery's gone. My fun energy battery's gone, but I'm feeling a little bit more re-energized for work and a bit more productive. And if that's you as well, you're feeling ready to take on new challenges. Maybe that involves pushing for a promotion. Please keep listening, because Pavita Cooper has some great tips for forging ahead in whatever career you might be in. As I mentioned in the intro, Pavita is chair of the 30% Club in the UK. And not only does she have loads of experience of being the only woman in many corporate rooms, she's also got experience of being the only person of colour as well. Pavita is a huge advocate for diversity in the workplace, with all the benefits that brings. And that's not just campaigning for change, but making it actually happen.
Thank you so much for agreeing to chat to us. Um, you have had an incredible career. I think it's fair to say it's kind of one of two halves, really, and the second dedicated to helping promote diversity and inclusion in the workplace, which is what we're all about. So let's start with why you feel that that is still important today, because some companies, some countries are really deciding to roll back on these policies.
Yes, and it's disappointing, isn't it, Danny, to see that happening because we're by no means done yet. I mean, I think I often talk about the myth of meritocracy in organizations where people believe that by implementing lots of very sophisticated policies and strategies. That's where all the hard work is. But I think if you look at the data and you look at the numbers, representation is not equal at all levels, either in organisations or across society. And so when you talk about, the second part of my career and why I decided to do this, it's because I really believe in levelling up, and that where a child is born or where they live or where they go to school should not really determine the outcome of where they end up in life. And I think the same is true in organisations, that everyone starts equal at the beginning, but the outcomes are definitely not equal. And we know that talent is everywhere, but opportunity and privilege is not. And so when it comes to, have organisations started to roll back, I think we're seeing a mixed picture. There are definitely some organisations that are using this moment in time as a bit of a reset. And we might argue that maybe some of that was actually necessary, that there was some very inflated D&I teams, organisations that had invested a lot in what could appear on the surface as quite performative actions. I think this allows us to really focus on the things and the levers that really make the difference. So we're not done, and we have to keep going.
Yeah, it's funny. I've seen a lot of people saying, yeah, well, we've done it, we've got there, but you're absolutely right. And this is obviously a podcast that focuses primarily on women, on their financial health. And we've spoken a lot about the need to get more women into boardrooms, more women at senior management levels, more women doing jobs that maybe in the past women haven't been particularly tied to. Finance is obviously a huge area where there's been a push to get more women involved. But in order for women to actually get those promotions, they have to go for those promotions. So, do you have any tips for women who are thinking, maybe I should go for that role? Because sometimes women's lives do get messy, and, the right job might come along, but it's the wrong time. And that makes for a really difficult decision.
It does, it does. And there are lots of things in what you were setting out there, Danny. I mean, some of that is about the impact of changes that happen in a woman's life throughout her career. So at the beginning, that might be the early years where she's thinking about starting a family, but later on, the menopause, also when you're caring for elderly parents or other people, or just other things that happen in your life. Big things can happen, divorce, you can move country, all sorts of things. So the notion of ambition, I think, is difficult for women, because when women express ambition, it can often be perceived negatively by others, not just men, but also by other women. And so I think women have to walk this very, very narrow tightrope of how they express ambition in a way that makes other people feel comfortable. And actually, that doesn't feel very fair, because men are not held to that same standard. But it is very challenging for women. But equally, what I experience with a lot of senior women is that when they're thinking about that next role or the very top job or being a CEO, often they'll look at the criteria that's set out. And if they can't meet all of it, they'll think, well, I'm not ready, or I'm not a suitable candidate. I can assure you there are many men that don't have all of the requisite skills or capabilities, and they're not taking the same view. So women often assume that they have to tick 10 out of 10 on the requirement list before they'll go for things. And so I would say to women, don't do that. If you've got two-thirds of the experience, go and talk to the recruiter or the chair or the senior independent director, if it's someone on your board, or your current CEO, and talk about, what's your narrative going to be about how you start to put yourself forward and talk about yourself in that role. So I think women often talk themselves down and talk themselves out of these opportunities.
And I know you personally experienced a very difficult decision about whether or not you were going to sort of push on in your career at a time when you were starting a family and realizing how difficult that juggle is.
Yes, and I think for me it was complex because one, I was a much, much older mum. I had my second child at 43, nearly 44. And so I'd waited a long time to have a family. And as a result, I was senior in my role, whereas a lot of other people are starting earlier in their career, and it's easier to make some of those trade-offs. It was very hard to be doing what I was doing at that level with two very young children. And the other thing, my husband was a CEO in a bank, and so he also had a demanding career. And like so many couples, the sort of trade-off of deciding who can leave first and can wait for the nanny, and who can travel, who can't. And that came at a point in my life where I was already operating at a very senior level. look, maybe I should have kept going. I made the decision for very personal reasons that I wanted to be around those children in their very early years. But I did keep working. What I had to do though was I had to pivot and have a personal reset around what work was going to mean for me and how I was going to do it. So it wasn't that I didn't want to work. I just couldn't continue on the path that I was on. And that's partly what led me to do the campaigning that I do now, because 15 years ago, I felt the landscape was not as easy as it is now, and it was very challenging.
It's tough because, on the one hand, as a woman, you kind of feel the need to apologize for not pushing through and, being superwoman. Helen Morrissey in the past has said that, she wished she'd never heard that term. But on the other hand, you then feel like you need to apologize for not wanting to stay at home and be that mum. It's tough.
It is really hard, but I'm very honest about who I am. I say that to my kids. I said it to my husband when I met him. This is who I am. I had been working a long time when I met him, when I had my family, and work had very much defined who I was. I loved it. I enjoyed it. I was good at it. I was successful. I'd got to a senior level, and I don't feel the need to apologize for that. And I don't feel the need to apologize for the fact that I love doing what I'm doing now. I do now. What I do now is I'm doing it in a different way, doing a lot of campaigning. I'm trying to agitate for change across, the broader business landscape. But again, I don't apologize for that because I think it's important. And I think I've got two young sons. I think it's important they see me doing that. And they're getting older. And I think they see the value of that now.
And do you think that things have changed? Do you think that workplaces are now more amenable to, flexible working, to helping mums stay in the workplace? Are they seeing the value of keeping women in those positions?
Yes and no. I mean, I think COVID was one of those sort of moments in time where many organizations recognized that having said nobody could work remotely, that obviously everyone was working remotely. And I think that challenged a lot of our assumptions and a model of work that was 60, 70 years out of date. And built and set up in a world where women stayed at home and men went to work, and the nature of work was very different as well. So I think it definitely changed the conversation, but what we have seen is quite a degree of snapback quite quickly. So, initially post-COVID, quite a lot of conversation about what an agile workforce would look like, what agile working would look like, what it meant to sort of have a hybrid approach to being partly at home, partly in the office. And we're seeing a rampant response, particularly from financial services, pushing people back in 5 days a week, apart from the one financial services organization that's run by a woman, which I also think is interesting. So I think it's not just about keeping women in the workforce. I think organizations are realizing that working parents need a different rhythm and pattern. And there are some brilliant campaigns at the moment going on social media looking at the length of the school day, the length of school holidays, and how two working parents are even supposed to cover that, even if they use all their holiday and take unpaid leave, and then the cost of clubs and everything else. So I think there is a debate that has come now, which is really saying in 2025 is a model of school and the model of work, do they fit? And they were set up at a time when women mostly stayed at home. So this is about both parents. It's not just about women.
So, assuming a woman decides that she wants to go for this promotion, whatever stage of her life she is, but particularly if she's, a working mum, she's juggling all of these different things. We all know what it's like trying to keep everything up in the air. How do we put ourselves in the best position for that? And what do we ask for to enable ourselves to keep those balls in the air?
So I think there's two things. I mean, I think it's really important that whoever you are, but for women, this is really important. You start with the end in mind. So thinking very, very long range. And if you want to be the CEO of an organization, it doesn't have to be FTSE 100, it could be FTSE 350, a private business. It could be, something very, very different. It could be a charity even. But if you know that that's where you're heading, you need to start with that goal in mind, because what ends up happening is women often are guided into what I call the non-power jobs. So CHRO into CIO, COO, CMO. And as a result, what happens is then when they get just one level below the CEO job, they haven't had the P&L experience or the large scale running a big business, which means that they will not be on the succession plan for the CEO role. It's very late then to say, I don't have the requisite skills. And so you have to start earlier by saying, if what I want to do is run something big, and that could be a big arts institution, it could be a big NHS trust, it could be a big PLC environment. You've got to think early on, what are the skills and experiences I need early in order to get myself ready? And I think often with women that comes too late. And the second thing is what is the context in which I need to be able to operate, the conditions which I need in order for me to keep going and to make this work. And that might be, a localized agreement with your line manager that isn't formal through HR about your working pattern, your working arrangement. It could be with your chair if you're the CEO. It could be with your board if you're at a very senior level. But just being upfront about what it is you need. And again, I think often for women, these feel like difficult conversations. But when you look at the women who have made it, they'll talk about how they did that early on, and that's why they kept going.
There is a lot to think about. And when you're maybe starting out, you possibly don't know the questions to ask, you don't know the path to follow. So having a mentor is so important. And that's something that you've got first-hand knowledge of.
Yes, definitely. And I think, look, that mentor doesn't have to be, a very senior woman. It can be a man as well. Because actually, I think what men do is look at these situations slightly differently to women. They have a slightly different perspective. And I think they can be very, very helpful in helping women sort of break down some of the challenges that are in their head and in their mind and help point out, well, actually, look, I have a lot of men come to me and they don't worry about these things. Why are you worrying about it? But I do think it needs to be someone who's further ahead in their career than you are, and someone who probably has done those roles and understands them and maybe has skin in the game, but in a different way. So it can't be someone who's in your organization or someone who's in the decision-making process for your promotion. So that really lends itself to you needing to have a very extensive network. And again, not always, I'm generalizing here, often women are so focused on delivering in their role and then carrying that invisible load that we've talked about already and keeping all those balls going, that often the one thing they trade off is keeping their networks going. But the problem is at the point at which you need that advice, some support, a reference, you want to lean into someone who might know the chair of an organization where you're thinking about going, that's when your network's really important. So I also say to women, don't give up on sustaining your network at the points at which it feels like there's a crunch point in your life and something's got to give. That is almost the most important thing that you should keep doing.
That's fascinating because it feels like we've almost kind of come full circle now. I speak to so many women for whom networking is the thing that slips, that they're present in the office, they're pushing for promotions, but the networking, those after hours meetings, the chance to meet somebody new, get new ideas, that's the bit that they feel is the only bit that they can sacrifice.
Yes, and I really understand that. And I'm not suggesting it all has to be out of hours, out of work, evening networking events. These days you can do it in so many ways. There are breakfast events, there are, online events. I'm talking really about relationships, which is more one-on-one. So, if you've sustained a good relationship with a colleague or a senior leader in your organization, or you leave or they leave, it's staying in touch and that being a mutual two-way thing. Because I can assure you, I get approached by a lot of people, some of whom I think have done a really good job of staying in touch and staying connected, and others I only hear from them when they're at a crux point in their career, leaving, been made redundant, at a crisis point. And I would still help them, but it's really interesting. I observe those individuals who've done more to stay in touch. And so I think it's human nature is you're going to lean into those people where you feel this is a genuine, authentic relationship.
And of course, as women progress up the ladder, like yourself, women and men, they in turn take what they have learned and become mentors. And what you were just saying then is really interesting because I imagine that you do get lots of people coming to you for help, for advice, and those relationships, whether it be in your personal life, in your work life, ultimately it's all down to people.
It is. And I think, that point I was making about authentic relationships is really important because if you're a good reader of people like I am, you can tell what the intentional motivation is in someone reaching out. And bizarrely now, because we're at the age that I am, or you're younger, but at the age I am, I should say,
Not much.
um, people's children or their godchildren, so it's now the next generation. Can you help this person? And, my intention is always to help those people who I think don't have as much access. So I tend to support women and leaders of colour because I feel that they generally probably don't have as much access. And so the limited time I have, I tend to be really thoughtful and systematic about who I'm going to support.
You talk about limited time, but the one thing that I noticed about you, the one thing that people like Helena Morrissey say about you is that you have a huge amount of drive. And that is really important. I think in some places, some generations, there's been a lot of discussion about it maybe not being there in the same way, but you put that drive in a lot of cases down to your background.
Yes, I mean, I'm the daughter of immigrants who came here in the late 60s, and my parents came with the equivalent of £10 in today's money. So they had absolutely nothing. When I was born, they were living in a one-bedroom room in a house and couldn't even afford the money to get them, to buy their own place. And it was a wonderful English couple who lived a few doors down who were almost like parents to them, who lent them the money to get a deposit on their first house. And at the point, I was sleeping in a drawer on the floor in this one bedroom when I was born. And so I do think that gives you a lot of drive because I saw them work so hard to build a better life for us, but all the time helping other people, all the time reaching out, supporting in the community, helping others, trying to improve others. So, as they were growing, they were lifting at the same time, lifting other people with them. So I think that gets instilled deeply in you. And I think it's very common in a lot of second generation immigrants because of the struggle we saw our parents going through. And whether it's nature or nurture, it's just a big part of who I am. So now it's less about me, it's more about making change in society and a passion and a hunger to improve things for other people.
What are you most proud of when you see your impact on the world in which you operate?
So it's big things and small things. So on a big thing, I would say when I look at something like the 30% Club, which Helena founded 15 years ago, and I met her when I was on maternity leave. So it was one of those serendipitous moments. A friend of mine introduced me to her, and she said, you should come and help us. You'd be great at this because of my background and experience. And I've been involved since. But we are now 15 years into that campaign. We're the oldest campaign in the UK. And we've gone from 9% representation of women on boards in the UK to over 45% across all of the FTSE, and some organisations are already at 50. And we've done that in the UK on a completely voluntary basis, led by business leaders, with no quotas, second only to France, and they do have quotas. So I'm really, really proud of the efforts of everyone in the ecosystem who over the last 15 years, many of whom I have to say are senior male allies, captains of industry across the city who spoke up when nobody else wanted to and continue to support us. And these are the men that if I ring them now and say, will you come and speak at an event with me? Will you come and support this event? If they can, they will always be there. So I'm really proud of that. And then I'd say small things, so women who I've met, maybe who are having a crisis point and grappling with how do they, with three young children, stay connected in the workforce. And one of them recently has just become a CEO, and lots of small examples of women who have a small victory or get to the very top. And I feel so much pride because I think sometimes it can be one conversation that can create a shift in someone's mindset, or it can be you introducing them to somebody, or it can be giving them access to another woman like them at the same stage in life. And it can just create a switch in their head that says, yes, I can do this.
If you could give one tip, one bit of advice to people that you've learned over the years when it comes to being successful, you used the word authentic earlier, to stay authentic as yourself in the workplace, what would it be?
Um, so this month is South Asia Heritage Month, and I've been asked to speak at a number of events. And I was doing an event last week actually on a board that I'm on with a group of amazing colleagues, really motivated, much earlier in their careers, talking about what it feels like for them and their difference in the workforce. And they were asking some very deep, probing questions about code switching and what it feels like to show up as yourself in an organization. And I think what I realized is I'd buried a lot of this stuff. I don't really think about it. And one of the insights I shared, but I don't often share because it's quite private, is that in my executive career, I think I spent a lot of time trying to be a version of myself that I thought would make other people feel comfortable, that they would be more comfortable with that version of me rather than being someone else. And so I spent a lot of time sort of and it is code switching, being someone very different to the person that I was at home with my family, in my community, in my faith, with my difference. And I didn't bring any of that in. Now, equally, there was little curiosity. No one ever asked me about it. So it wasn't all me just hiding and minimizing. It was a sense of pressure that I felt that that's who I had to be in order to be accepted. And having left my executive career and built a portfolio, which requires me to give myself fully in order to engage other people and get other people's support and allyship, I have to very much just be me because they're not going to buy into me trying to be a different version of myself. And as a result, I'm much happier and I'm a much truer version of who I am. And I will speak more freely about it. And I think women do this a lot, actually. I think they feel that there has to be a persona that they have to portray because of that double standard I talked about earlier and about the scrutiny and about how, if a woman fails, she feels like she's failing on behalf of all women. And so you sort of have to be this version of perfection in the workplace. I would say, I know it's not easy, but be as true as you possibly can to yourself, because I think that version of you is going to have more impact in the work environment. And actually, then as you become more and more senior as a leader, I think people that follow you, your colleagues, they'll really buy into that. And I think you'll be a more authentic leader. And I think we saw that post-COVID, the evolution of what good leadership meant, and that hierarchy, command and control fell away. And the leaders who are really winning now, I think, whether they're men or women, are the ones who are much more open. They'll speak out on issues of social justice. They have more empathy. They'll listen more. They inquire. They're open to feedback. And so I think the model of leadership is changing, and the more of who we can be ourselves and be authentic, I think really helps that.
You were talking about being authentic. And I think in some ways, as you get older, it's easier to be more authentic. And you become more senior, it's also easier to be authentic. But for younger women, although the workplace maybe is changing to allow you more flexibility, they also have additional pressures. And you mentioned social media as being one of them.
Yes, I mean, there's for women our age, there's an amazing woman in America on Instagram, and she runs this site called We Don't Care Club, and it's hilarious, all the things we don't care about anymore. And she does it sitting in the front of her car behind the wheel, and she does it in this really flat voice in a monotone. It's very funny. It's an ironic sort of tongue-in-cheek thing. But it's amassed all these female followers who just of a certain age who just say, "Oh, I'm with her. There's so many things I don't care about." So you're right. I think for us it gets easier. I certainly look at young women today, and I think they have a level of pressure that we didn't have because of social media and the pressure to look a particular way. And I mean everything from going to yoga or Pilates and then Instagramming that and saying I was at 5 a.m. I was doing this, and then at work, here I am with my perfect desk, and it's down to things like the way their desk looks and what matcha they're drinking, and then I'm like killing it at work, and then here I am after work with my Instagrammable life, and I do think that is another pressure and another level of scrutiny that we didn't have. It's very public in a sense that I have to be perfect in every part, and not just the way we look, but how I'm spending my time, where I'm going, and I think that's really tough.
And of course, workplaces also look at social media, particularly when they're looking at promotions or hiring people in the first place.
Exactly, yes. And I think, I will say to people, young people, be very careful because these days, there's a record of your life everywhere. And, there are certain jobs now, and particularly if you work in a regulated environment, there is more and more scrutiny. And even at universities, even at earlier and earlier stages, people are looking at the footprint of who you are. And particularly if you want to go into public service, that's the other thing. I think if you're going to take a public appointment, there's a lot of scrutiny on, what you've said, who, if you've been active on X, political commentary, things you may have, causes that you've supported or things you've said. So you have to think about all those things much earlier.
That was Pavita Cooper, chair of the 30% Club in the UK. Thank you so much for coming on. You can find more information about the 30% Club online or via LinkedIn. Now, I'm aware Laura's not here, so it falls to me to ask, did Pavita share a financial confession? Love this bit.
we just like to delve into other people's financial habits, don't we? We want a glimpse behind the curtain. And Pavita's was great. And it was one that really struck a chord with me. Pavita, thank you so much for talking to us. That's been just hugely inspiring. Before I let you go, we always ask all of our guests for a financial confession or a dilemma that they have experienced over the years. Do you have one?
Yes, I'd say it's a confession and a dilemma. So, like many people, I love to shop, and I started my early career in retail, and I think that's where it came from. And I used to love the experience of being immersed in beautiful retail environments and just, seeing the seasons change, watching Christmas come and go. I don't have time, like most people, to do that now, and I do everything online. So the joy of it has gone. However, I do have a small addiction, which my poor husband has to tolerate, which is we spend a lot of time in the US working, just traveling for holidays and things. And the minute I land, I have to go to a CVS store or a Target because I'm addicted to toiletries. And so I love going in and buying all the little minis and all the things you can't buy in the UK. We now have this huge cupboard at home where if you open it, it all falls out. I don't need any more, but I can't stop myself. And so a Target CVS run as soon as I land. And as I say, my poor husband, I mean, he's so baffled and bemused by it because it's not expensive, it's not high end, but it gives me so much pleasure and I absolutely love it. So it is a dilemma because I can't stop.
On the flip side, my sister now lives in the States, and she has to go to Boots every time she comes back. And similarly, she stocks up on, relatively cheap stuff, but that her case is bursting at the end.
Yeah.
And I think, it's that sort of familiar. And what happens if you're not going to get back there again?
And it's just fun. I like it. It's sort of like, will it be in stock? Will it not be outside? And also, if you're jet lagged, it's a great way to stay awake.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Danny. It's been lovely to speak with you.
Yeah, I love this. I mean, it's one of my pet peeves when you go on holiday and have to buy these miniatures that they end up costing the same as the full bottle. I mean, dry shampoo is the best example. It costs the same, if not more, than it does for one massive thing. But no, I love that because I feel like, in the US, there are those extra like products and stuff that you just really, really want that you can't particularly maybe get over here unless you're willing to pay about 5 times as much from Amazon or something. So yeah, no, love that. My bathroom cabinet, I mean, I've got 2 boys and I've got a husband who has really no kind of beauty products. So I'm lucky I've got those cabinets to myself. And I think mine are embarrassingly full to bursting. So yeah, absolutely love that one.
I love a mini, but my kids now love minis too. And I often find that when I go to pack my overnight bag and I'm reaching for the mini shampoo and I shake it and I realise that there's none left.
Oh yeah, it's like leaving one or two like crisps in the big share packet. I have to say I'm a big fan of buying the little pots and decanting because I'm quite fussy over like my shampoo, for instance, and some of my skincare. But yes.
We love a confession. So if you want to get in touch, if you fancy sharing one of your own confessions, we would love to hear it. We like a glimpse behind everybody's curtain. But that's it for this episode. A massive thank you to you all who have signed up to our newsletter. If you are new to Money Matters, do join our community so we can let you know what articles we've put up, let you know when we're holding any in-person events. Next podcast, Laura's going to be back and we're going to be talking about how being single impacts your retirement and tips for dealing with that. So do make sure that you subscribe to the pod so that you don't miss an episode and let other women know. Just time for me to say a huge thank you to Charlene for stepping in as my co-host this week. Hi, Charlene. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It's been such a pleasure. I mean, I love chatting pensions, especially.
Yeah, this episode was tailor-made for you. It was as if it was planned. Until next time, thank you so much for listening. Do check out our socials. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. It's at AJ Bell Money Matters, and bye for now.
Before you go, please remember this podcast is for educational purposes, and the views expressed don't necessarily reflect those of AJ Bell. The podcast isn't telling you if a certain investment is suitable or not. Don't forget that the value of investments can change, and you can lose money as well as make it. It's also important to remember that how you're taxed will depend on your individual circumstances, and rules can change. The way an investment performed in the past may not be the same as how it behaves in the future. If you want help, go see a qualified financial advisor.